registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Lee.
Thank you very much, Jessica. All right, so welcome to our webcast today. The idea of this is that we're hopeful that those people who are either starting off on their career path in digital forensics or wish to embark on that path will be able to get something from this that will help them in their endeavors to do so. So let's start off though just by introducing everyone. So I'm here first, but I'll go last. So let's first of all, Jason, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
So good evening, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Jordaan. I have been doing digital forensics now for, I think, I'm in my 22nd year, if my memory serves me correctly. A lot of work in law enforcement before moving into the private sector. I'm currently a SANS certified instructor teaching 4500 and 4508, which is our Windows Forensic Analysis course and our Advanced Forensics course. And I'm also one of the co-authors of the DFIR 308 course, which is the Digital Forensics Essentials course.
Okay, awesome. Kat, could you give us a rundown of who you are?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everybody. My name is Catherine, or Kat for short. I've been doing digital forensics now for about the last 12 years on a wide variety of cases. And I'm also one of the co-authors on FIR 308.
Okay, thank you. And Phil, could you please tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Phil. I've been working in forensics since 2011, where I started in law enforcement for the last about 8-9 years. And then I moved over and work in the private industry for one of the other SANS instructors, Nick Klein, where I work at Klein & Co. And I also, in my free time, spend some time compiling the news in This Week in Forensics, which some people might have read.
Fantastic. All right, so looking at the screen and hearing you guys talk about it, all three of you are co-authors for this new Forensics 308 class. So before we get started, this kind of ties into our overall topic here, but Kat, could you give us a little bit of an idea about what this new SANS class is and who might be interested in taking it?
Yeah, absolutely. So FIR 308 is a course that the three of us wanted to put together to really cover the fundamentals of what digital forensics is. So you'll hear both people talk about digital forensics, incident response, what it means to go to court. And we really wanted to pull all of that together and just have a course where we could discuss what they are, what they mean, with no prerequisites. You don't need any existing knowledge in any of those areas. It's really aimed at everyone, really. So we're talking about managers, we're talking about lawyers, people who might want to do forensics later on, but maybe aren't sure at the moment, or just have an interest at the moment. There are kind of really no limitations as to who it's aimed at. And it's really to see if you do want to pick this up as a career, if you're just interested in the subject, or everyone uses a computer, right? So maybe there are elements of forensics that are applicable to you. And it's really going through all of those and just laying that groundwork.
Awesome, thank you. So this class is currently being written, and one of my roles at SANS is that I get to test the labs for these classes before they end up with you, the student. So I can tell you from my own experience looking at this is going to be a pretty cool class to be involved with. And if you are yet to take the step into doing digital forensics, this might be the class for you to take. All right, so finally, there's me, Lee Whitfield. Been doing forensics for, I've lost count now, probably about 13 or 14 years. Started off in the UK doing contract work for the police, and then moved over to Texas a few years ago, and now I work full-time for SANS, and I'm also a SANS instructor. You'll notice that all 4 of us on the panel are all from countries other than the US, which to me is absolutely wonderful. There will be no y'alls, howdies, or dudes in the whole presentation. So yeah, that will be a nice change for some of you. All right, so let's start off by going around the panel and finding out how each person was able to get their foot in the door in forensics. So Phil, why don't we start with your story?
Sure. Mine was, well, kind of interesting. So basically, I finished my university degree in 2009 because I went on exchange to Texas. So there may be some yalls if I revert back to that. But basically, that was kind of when the global financial crisis kicked off. So getting a job in what I studied, information systems, was actually not too easy. What had happened though was one of my last subjects and one of my favorite subjects, coincidentally, was in digital forensics, which one of the lecturers had just decided, I'll put a class together and see how it goes. From there, I did a site visit at the State Electronic Evidence Branch, which is the New South Wales Police Lab, and reached out to one of the guys there and said, you know what, I really like this. Can I apply for a job? And he said, well, actually, we're looking for people. And it took a little bit of time, I think, between receiving notification that, I was on the shortlist to get the job and actually starting. It was about a year. But I ended up getting in and stayed there till basically last year. It was a lot of fun. We did a lot of interesting work and yeah, had a good time, I guess, helping people.
Awesome. Jason, how about you? How did you get your start in forensics?
So I'm probably like old school nerd. Obviously at school, played around with computers. Sort of grew up with the first sort of microcomputer. Playing around with Sinclair ZX81s, Commodore 64s, all that kind of stuff. When I left school in South Africa, you had to do compulsory national service, and I basically chose to do my national service in the South African Police Service. While I was in police college, I'd basically been identified to move directly into the detective service, where I ended up working for our commercial crime branch. Which is basically, like a fraud squad, does a lot of financial cases and those type of things. And obviously, when you deal with financial stuff, a lot of stuff, especially in the early 90s, were done on computers. And considering that I was firstly probably the only person in my unit that knew how to type, and I was the only person who actually owned a computer, any sort of case that came in that sort of remotely resembled or had anything to do with the computer, I ended up getting. So that was sort of early 90s when kind of digital forensics was in its infancy. We started playing around, figuring out how things developed, and I just kind of developed with the role, I suppose you could say. And then, ultimately, I was transferred to our National Anti-Corruption Agency, where I'd basically been tasked to set up a national digital forensics laboratory, and I was the national commander of that facility until I left government service in 2014. And it's been doing it ever since. So yeah, I kind of grew into the role probably more than anything else. I combined my love with computers with my love for investigations.
Nice, thank you. And Kat, how did you get into the field?
So I basically talked my way into a job. So I did my bachelor's degree, and there was one optional module in that degree in digital forensics, and that kind of piqued my interest. I then went on, applied for a graduate scheme in the UK with a big company. I was a developer for a couple of years on a space project, which was really, really cool, and I loved that job. I was passed over for promotion one year. Despite loving the company that I was working for, I decided to look for jobs, and one came up that was for digital forensics. And I thought, well, that would be really cool. So I applied. I had no forensic qualifications to speak of. I had zero experience. And I went into that interview and basically demonstrated what I could remember from the module in uni, acknowledged a bunch of stuff I didn't know. I committed to do a master's degree part-time for the first 2 years in that job to get up to speed as quickly as possible while gaining on the job experience. And luckily for me, they said, yeah, okay, then let's go for it. And that's it. Been doing it ever since.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for all three of you for that. So in terms of how I got into the field, I kind of went more along Jason's line than anything else. Again, grew up using computers. My dad was a big fan of technology, so we always had a computer of some description in the house. And whenever I would inevitably break it, my dad would say, well, you broke it, you fix it. So I would have to then do all the research and figure out what I'd done wrong, edit the autoexec.bat and config sys files to make the thing work again. And just got my basic grounding in doing something with computers very early on. Later, when I went to university, the university I went to did not have a digital forensics degree at the time, and I signed up to do business information systems. And right about the same time, a gentleman moved in just very close to where we lived from the US. I was in the UK at the time. And he worked for a company called Guidance Software. And because my wife is American and they were American, they started to have this nice, friendly relationship. And he started to talk to me and say, are you interested in doing computer forensics at all? And I said, well, I've heard about it. I know a little bit about it, but that's as much as there is in my knowledge base. He's like, okay, well, here, let me help you out with that. And he came around with a pile of books and some software and showed me how to do all this stuff. And from the very first moment he showed me how to retrieve a deleted file from an allocated space, I was totally hooked. Right about the same time, the university that I was at, they started up one of the first digital forensics degrees in the country, and I swiftly moved over to that. And one of the things immediately that was apparent to me is that the instructor, with no forensic knowledge other than what he was reading at the time, didn't have classes set up for forensics at all, didn't really know how to set it up. So he knew I was interested and asked my advice, and he basically formed the entire class based off the books that I had already read through and committed to memory. And yeah, so I ended up doing pretty well in those classes. I finished university on a Friday and started my first forensics job on the Monday. And the way I went about that is that in the months leading up to the end of university, I emailed and texted and called every single forensics company in the vicinity that I could find, and insisted that they take my my CV and that they interview me for a position and so on. So talked to a lot of people and eventually went to work for a company called Cypher in the northwest of England. And that's pretty much how I got my foot in the door there. So as you can tell from all four of our experiences, there's some things here that pretty much ring true, okay? While we can sit here and we can tell you all the different ways in which we did something, it's not always going to be the same for you. Sometimes people kind of fall accidentally into doing forensics, like in Jason's case. Sometimes it's just a passing interest that you might hear about and think, oh, I would quite like to do that, like Phil. Sometimes it's a career change which is quite forced upon you in Catherine's circumstances. And then for me, I knew this was something that I wanted to do for quite some time, and I deliberately went out looking for any opportunity that I could. Now, I will tell you, just from my own experience, okay, my brother Simon, he also works in forensics. In fact, we were both on the same university course at the exact same time. Like I said, when I finished university, I started work the very next week. Simon didn't have that same that same opportunity. He, in fact, didn't end up getting his first job in forensics for, I believe, 6 or 7 months after graduating from college. So it just goes to show you that everyone's route is going to be a little bit different. What works for some people might not necessarily work for you, but what we want to try and do today is to help show that, you know, or help to guide you in that there's certain things that you can do which will not necessarily guarantee you success, but will certainly guarantee you to be a top contender for success. So yeah, like I said, everyone is going to have a slightly different route to their final path. Now, going back to my brother Simon, it was very easy for him to become discouraged after the first couple of months of looking for work and not being able to get anything. This kind of coincided with a slight downward slide in the economy, so people weren't necessarily hiring us very much anymore. But he, yes, I mean, he did get discouraged at times, but he still persisted and still did everything he could to try and find an opportunity in his chosen field. So that's one of the things which you're going to have to do. In this field, you're going to find that not every single job in forensics is going to be advertised somewhere. I don't know how the other panelists feel about this, but for me personally, every job that I've had working in forensics is because either I went directly to someone to ask, or I heard about it from someone else. I never applied for a job that I saw posted online anywhere. Any of you guys have different experiences?
Well, I can just chat from my side, Lee. You know, obviously I started out in government service, and it wasn't a digital forensics job that I started out in. But the irony is once, you know, especially this industry is still fairly small, once you are recognized, people get to know about you. And if you are contributing actively to the community, people will actually seek you out. And I mean, I must be honest, probably in the last 10 years, I must have easily had anywhere between 50 to 60 different job offers from headhunters and people who've heard about you that have actually approached you. So I know that definitely does happen in the industry.
Yeah, and to add on that, one of the reasons why I started my blog is because I didn't want to apply for jobs. I don't really like interviews, and I don't want to have to sell myself, I guess. So one of the reasons why I kicked it off was just to say, well, it's a small industry. If people kind of see what I know and how I do things, then maybe they'll come to me, and it kind of did happen that way. And ultimately, that's how I moved over to where I am now.
Yeah, same for me. The very first job I got in forensics, I did apply for. I found it on a job website. I applied. I went through interview. I got the job. But as the others have said, once you kind of get a name for yourself, you get to know the community. It is a small community worldwide, so you do tend to find that people start coming and talking to you and asking you to do stuff rather than you actively having to go and seek it from that point on.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of goes really along the lines of what I was saying to start with, is that, you know, once you're in the field, it's a lot easier to transition between jobs or employers and things like that. In fact, they make it so easy because they have these conferences that they put on, and you show up and there's people there who say, hey, are you looking for a job? Because we'd quite like to give you one. A number of times that I've gone to any of these places and someone has said something along those lines to me, I kind of lose count. But that's for when you're already in the field. What about before? What about when you're trying to get in? Well, I see this question a lot. I see it posted on Reddit, on Twitter, on Facebook. I even have people coming in and posting comments on my blog asking about it. And there's no surefire way to do this. But what I can say is that there are opportunities. I know that people who, I mean, let's see, from my own perspective, okay, I have been in situations where I've been able to hire people, and whenever I hire someone, the first thing I do is I look at their CV, and now that's not going to be the be all and end all, because I know that the CV doesn't tell me everything that I need to know about someone. So I try to interview as many people as possible. And when I interview someone, I have them come in, I ask them questions about what they would do in a specific situation. If they can't come in for an interview specifically at that point, then I'll send them some written questions to answer themselves. And then once we get past all of the verbal discussion, I hand them a phone or a computer and say, okay, walk me through how you would take a forensic image of one of these things, and or give me as much information about them as you can. And I give them some tools if necessary, and then they move on and do it. Other things that I've seen people do is unpaid internships. Like someone will finish university or be in the middle of university, and during the summer they'll go up to a potential employer and say, hey, I would like to work for you for free over the summer. Would you like some free labor? Now, Jason, I think you own your own company, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's something we do quite actively with the local universities.
Yeah. Well, if someone walked up to you and said, hey, I'd like to work for you for free, how would you feel about that?
Well, okay, obviously with some of the cases we work on, we don't just take anybody that sort of comes up to work for free, but I kind of look at it this way. If somebody's willing to work for free to gain knowledge or experience, that means they've got the right attitude. And I feel in this field, attitude is everything. So they've already elevated themselves about everybody else that we potentially look at. Then we look at things like problem-solving ability, but that willingness to go and get experience, no matter what, that is a huge positive for us.
Thank you very much. And I completely agree. I mean, you've got to present yourself as someone who wants to grow in knowledge in that field, someone who's going to do everything they can to expand their knowledge, not just rely on what they know now. As we'll see later on, if you don't continue to improve your knowledge in this field every day, you're going to get left behind. And if you can already be in the process of learning or knowing all of this data whenever you walk into a company for the first time, you will likely have a significant advantage. A few years ago, the company I was working for was going through a bit of a transition period, and we hired a couple of new guys, and we hired this one gentleman, and he was fresh out of university, and he was in contention for the job with 5 or 6 other people. Some of these guys had 10 or plus years experience in the field, and basically he was the least qualified among them in order to take this job. But as he demonstrated his knowledge and his willingness to learn, it was quite apparent that it was him who we wanted to hire. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, try and hit the ground running as much as you can.
I can add a couple of things. There was basically with when I kicked off my kind of career in forensics, as I said, I kind of reached out to one of the guys that worked at the cops and said, I'm kind of really interested. What can I do to prepare myself? And he said, oh well, these are the blogs that I read. And at the time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. And Lee, I think you know where this is going. So I ended up looking for every digital forensics podcast that I could find, and lo and behold, found the Forensic Forecast, along with Inside the Core and Cyberspeak. And I basically went back and listened to every single episode that I could find. And you just kind of pick up a lot of useful information, things that people are talking about. You say, well, I don't know about that, and I can look it up. Now, at the time, I wasn't able to kind of drop everything and work for free. I kind of still needed money, but I could at least do all of these things to kind of excel a little bit further, so that when I did ultimately get an interview, I had things I could talk about. So whilst I might not have passed the practical components of the interview process, they said, oh, well, what can you tell us about this thing? And I was like, oh, actually, I know this because I'd heard people talking about it on these podcasts, or I'd read about it on blogs. And that was probably what set me apart from other people that had also gone through the interview process, because all of these people also had no experience. It was an introductory role.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah.
If I could think quickly, what Paul said, I know it's not silly. We get a lot of people that will approach us out of the blue saying, hey, we want to come work for you. And one of the first questions that I generally ask, which sort of falls in what Phil said, I want to know what blogs they read. I want to know what books they're reading. I want to know what podcasts or YouTube channels they're listening to. Because if they've got a real interest in digital forensics, that'll be the things they'll be looking at. If they're not doing any of those things, then how interested really are they?
I can understand that. The only thing I would say about the whole thing is that if you're listening to Forensic Forecast, you're getting pretty desperate. But for those of you who don't know, that used to be my podcast, so I'm allowed to say that. I can also say that about Cyberspeak too, because that's obvious. So anyway, all right. So I think we've established there's a few different ways in which you can get into the field here. But as far as getting an education for yourself, that's going to be the priority. Now, whether that comes as formal education or as what you'll see in a few moments when we start to look at some slides from Phil, is an informal education. You're going to have not just one or the other, but both. I know that, for example, in the US specifically, that if you do not have a degree, then lawyers are unlikely to put you on the stand to testify. Okay, so getting a degree, while it's not going to necessarily prove that you are a smart and capable person, what it will do is that it will get you noticed by potential clients who may have overlooked you previously. The other thing it'll do is it'll prove to a potential employer that you're willing to commit to something which lasts 3 or 4 years, and that you will stick it out. So formal education, as you can see here, I've got divided up into 2 different areas. So the first one will be getting that degree. Now, it could be a 2-year degree here in the States. It could be a Bachelor of Science. It could be a master's degree, anything. But what areas do you want to study in? Well, it's going to depend, first of all, on what you're able to do, and your location and everything else. But typically, they're going to fall into like one of these 3 categories. Okay, you're either going to have computer science, digital forensics, or computer security. Now, computer science is good if you want to get down to the bits and bytes of developing and everything else. Now, it's not necessarily going to be the case for everyone. I can tell you that The degree that I did in computer forensics it involved some programming, but not extensively. I know some people, in fact, I know there's one gentleman who I'm trying to help find work right now. He started in the computer science degree, and knowing he wanted to go into forensics, but it bored him to death. Well, not literally, obviously, but he's still around. But he was bored with it. He didn't like it. He found it to be less than the stellar classes that he was hoping for. So he's moved over to do a different kind of degree, and hoping that just the fact that he has a degree will help him land this dream job of his. Now, yep, computer science, very popular, but may not necessarily be the right step for you. What about a degree in computer security? Now, you see these everywhere now. You find computer security degrees being offered by virtually every community college or university on the planet, because they understand that people are going to want to get involved in this area. And the same with digital forensics. You'll find a lot of these too. Now, what I would do, my personal opinion here, having had discussions with many people who've been through these programs, is that do your research. Now, if you have no other option than to take a digital forensics course from a local community college, then that's down to you. But if you have the opportunity to look around and be choosy, then go and ask other people, other professionals in the field. I mean, certainly you can come to either the four of us on the panel here. You can reach out to people on Twitter with the DFIR hashtag and just ask a question. You know, what do you guys think about this particular university program? Would you recommend it? And some will have good reputations, some will have less than good reputations. So you want to make sure that you're going somewhere that's going to teach you the things you need to know and is being taught by someone who actually knows what they're talking about. The last thing you want to do is roll up to a class and find that the guy who writes iPhone apps for a living is the one who's teaching the digital forensics class, because quite frankly, it's not his field of expertise. So there's those. The other thing for formal education is that you can take industry classes. And obviously, because we're all from SANS, we're going to say you should take a SANS class. And we've already talked a little bit about 308, how that's like a foundational class where you can go and learn about the basics of digital forensics and how it would help you in your future career there. We also have Forensics 498, which is battlefield forensics, where you're going to learn things like how to collect forensic images of devices, how to do phone dumps, how to collect data from various different sources, and then how you're going to quickly analyze some of that data to get quick wins. And then we have Forensics 500, which is our Windows forensics class. And in there, full 6-day class dedicated to investigating all of the different useful artifacts that Windows has to help you in your investigations. So yeah, by all means, go do the degree, but supplement that knowledge with further stuff afterwards. Jason, Kat, Phil, you have any comments on that?
This thing with the degree, and again, I've seen, you know, especially if you're going to do any kind of legal work, and I'm not saying criminal justice work, but generally any kind of legal work, the courts do tend to want to see somebody with a degree coming in. You know, if you look in the US, applying the Dartmouth standards, that's becoming an issue. In the United Kingdom, the forensic regulator in the Home Office is kind of, you know, driving that way as well. You know, having a degree is important. I mean, my first degree, for example, wasn't in computer science or anything like that. I did a police degree, a sort of combined police law degree. But I realized that I would have to go back to university effectively and do a computer science degree, and did my honors and master's degrees in computer science, because I knew that that was going to be something I'd require in court, even though I already had experience. So don't discount the degree as an important criteria, but also, that being said, a degree by itself is certainly not going to be all. You're going to have to supplement that with other kinds of actual, like, hardcore relevant forensic training.
I think just to add to that from my side, so I really don't come from the kind of law enforcement, legal kind of government background. I come from very much the commercial side of things. And I think certainly when I've been recruiting people, a degree is very much a nice to have. For me, it explains more about the person in terms of they're willing to commit to a big chunk of their education. They're willing to commit to something for a few years and work hard at it and achieve that, and that's brilliant. I think it's not, from my point of view, I don't look for that as an essential thing. I look for it more on the is nice to have side of things. I think for me, when I'm recruiting people, I want to see that kind of hunger for the subject. It's more about, do you live for this? Do you really want to do this? What kind of aptitude do you have for it? What drives you? What research do you do in your own time? It's more that side of things that would get me interested in somebody. And if they have a degree, it's a bonus. So I guess what I'm kind of trying to say is it depends on the recruiter to some extent. And I think depending on whether you want to go into the kind of more law enforcement, legal side of things, or whether you're looking at the kind of commercial, so like HR investigations, internal investigations, which is more kind of most of my background. I guess it's probably slightly less important on that side. It's still a good idea, so I would still recommend doing it. But I think if you don't have one, maybe don't panic. Just look at other ways of getting into the field.
Yeah, and just expanding on that a bit, like speaking to Nick about what he looks for when he's hiring people, we don't look for people that have a background in forensics necessarily, because we teach forensics. We can teach these new hires, whatever they need to know. What we can't teach them is, the ability to critically think, to communicate well, to be passionate for a subject. It's impossible to teach passion. And so, by all means, if the jobs that you want have a solid requirement for a degree, and the previous job that I had, it said if you want to work here, you have to have a degree in an associated field. And in some instances, if you want to go into law enforcement, the forensic side of the house, you actually also have to go through law enforcement training and become a police officer. Some of those things, I guess, are hard requirements, but it really is about looking at the types of jobs that you want to do and looking at what they say you need. And sometimes there is wiggle room and sometimes there isn't. So I guess, yeah, the advice there is always to look at where you want to go and see what steps you need to take to reach those goals. And if that means getting a degree, unfortunately, that's the world we currently live in.
Right, thank you. Okay, so as we've seen from, or heard rather, from everyone so far, is that there's many different ways to get into this field, okay? We've heard from Jason about how he started off in law enforcement. We've seen that both Kat and Phil have gone and openly applied for positions, and then they've moved on from there. I know that in SANS, in the forensics curriculum, that there's a number of people who teach in this curriculum are former military, where they served doing some kind of media exploitation for the armed forces, and as a result of that, they moved on to doing full-fledged digital forensic investigations. And then once they left the armed forces, they went into private sector and started to do work there. Other things that I've seen happen too is, Jason kind of touches on this a little bit with his experiences, but where people kind of accidentally become the forensics guy. Okay, now this can be definitely on the law enforcement side, but this can also be on the civil side too. There's a number of people I know who have started off working in the IT department for their company, and the company is sued or something like that, and then they are forced to work with or against some forensics people, and that's where they end up finding out, oh, I really like doing this stuff, I want to keep doing it. And so then they get to go to their company and ask for training budgets and things of that sort, so they can go to classes and learn the stuff. So there's just lots of different ways to get involved with this. Unfortunately, like I said, we can't draw the path for you, but we can kind of give you some ideas about how to get there. All right, what about this informal route? So Phil really touched on this quite a bit earlier on, so I'm going to let him talk mostly about this coming up. But we have the degrees, we have the SANS classes. Now, yeah, I took my degree from 2003 to 2006. If I had just rested on my laurels and not done anything more than just have that degree, then here we are 14 years later. What use would that degree be? Well, nothing. Operating systems are completely different to the way they were back then. The forensic artifacts are different. While there are still some people using Windows XP, it's not the de facto operating system anymore. Also, you know, in my degree, learned nothing about Mac or Linux or cloud forensics or anything like that. And so there's no way that we can just get our degree or our formal education and be satisfied with it. The same with the SANS classes. If you took what was 408, you know, a few years ago, you may think, well, that's fine, I've already taken that class. What you don't realize is that with its changing to Forensics 500 now, it's now a more advanced class that teaches much more advanced techniques to get to the underlying data. So how do you keep current? Well, that's what Phil is largely going to be talking about now. So Phil, what do you want to tell us about This Week in Forensics?
What can I tell you about This Week in Forensics? Okay, a few people have read it. A few people like reading it. I work with Ladrina, one of the other 4500 instructors. She works over at Cyber-Reason, and so I was working on this project for a few years before I brought her on as a contributor, because it was just getting out of hand. We go through, I don't even know how many links a week. We pretty much produce at least 100 to 200 articles for people to read across the entire space. So, you know, forensic analysis and threat hunting and malware and everything that's upcoming and going on in the field. The only reason why I do it is because I want to know what's happening, and it just helps me to do it. And then if it helps everyone else, you know, really appreciate like that it's helping other people, because that way, you know, they can see what's going on, and it saves them a bit of time, and it makes me read everything. So that's why I pretty much kicked it off. And then also every month I put together a short podcast talking about, you know, what I thought was quite interesting to talk about. And that's about 10 minutes, so it's quick and easy listen. But otherwise, yeah, I always tell everyone that it's one of the easiest ways to keep up with what's happening around the grounds.
So you talked a little bit earlier about your motivation for doing this. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that in a bit more detail?
Sure. So I always had, I like RSS. It allows me to subscribe to a whole bunch of blogs and just see when a new article has come out, rather than go and find them. And so I signed up to Feedly, and I add a whole bunch of RSS feeds, and whenever I find something that's partially related to forensics, or someone started a new blog, I add it to my list, and just wait there patiently until someone posts something. What I was finding was there's a limit where, if you've left an article on there for 30 days, it just expires and disappears. And I thought, I need motivation to make sure I read these every single week, because I need to know what's happening, because I'll find something that someone publishes today that will be absolutely critical for a case that I'm working on tomorrow. And so I just basically set a goal of every Sunday I will post, and I have done that since whenever I started the blog in 2016, I think it was. And so that, I just go through, skim through as much as I can, deep dive and read anything that sounds really interesting and write up a summary. And it's been really helpful. Like, I've actually had cases, like police cases, serious major crime, that I have solved through relationships that I've formed from reading and sharing information with other people. I posted up on Twitter saying I've got this problem, and I had a bunch of people that are really knowledgeable in the field going, "Oh, I'll help you," and they wrote blog posts or shared test data and helped me come with the solution that I just wouldn't have been able to do necessarily on my own in the time that I was given. So just building that, I guess, community and engaging in the community, and This Week in Forensics helped me do that, was really critical for me.
Thank you very much. What about things like, well, specifically to do with like your career development? Have you seen it affect that?
People know who I am. That kind of has been particularly helpful, especially when it came to transitioning from, job A to job B. I've had people within the industry, reach out and say, "I want to give you a job," which was particularly useful when I was looking to move to different companies. There was a period where I thought, I've done 8 years of the cops, and it was time to move on. And so instead of applying for different jobs, I just reached out to different friends and said, "I'm looking, what have you got?" And that was quite useful.
Yep. I definitely found the same thing. Whenever I started to do forensic forecast, I was working for a small company in the northwest of England who no one had ever heard of before, and suddenly, after doing some podcasts and writing a few articles, I found that people actually were interested in who I was, and I ended up interviewing at a couple of companies that I would have never have thought in a million years I would ever have had a chance of getting into. So it's really interesting. And what you said before, I really just want to pick up on that too, where you said that you come back to things that you've kind of posted about months ago, and it helps you in an investigation. Well, I'll show you quite an embarrassing story from my history here, where I occasionally write blog posts for Forensic Forecast, and sometimes they're not technical in nature, sometimes they are. And I had this one case that I was working on, and there was this one artifact, and I'm like, I swear I've heard about this before. And so I went on Google to look up anything I could about this specific forensic artifact, and the very first hit on Google was an article that I'd written for my own blog. So like, oh yeah, I remember all this now. Yeah, it was quite. I should really not share that story publicly, but oh well. All right, so other resources that we might have. Hacking Exposed, Computer Forensics blog from David Cowan. David Cowan also hosts the Forensic Lunch, which is at the moment weekly on a Friday at noon Central Time, where Dave and Matt, who both work for KPMG now, they provide insights into special projects that they're working on, or they bring other people on as guests to talk about projects that they're working on that different tools and methodologies that are being implemented to help them in their daily work lives. Dave also runs almost daily at the moment his test kitchen on YouTube also, where he literally walks you through, like he picks a forensic artifact most of the time and says, let's figure out how this forensic artifact actually works. And sometimes it confirms what we already know, sometimes it changes what we already know. So it's really good to watch that and get caught up with things there. And then Phil, I don't know if you want to talk about DFIR and DFIR training.
Sure. So these two websites, one was started by Devin Ackerman and Mary Ellen Kennel, and now there's a few other contributors on that as well, which is about DFIR. And then DFIR Training was started by an unknown person, but is now being maintained by Brett Shavers. Basically, they work to compile as much information about digital forensics as they can. They are large repositories of information, and I tell everyone, especially those getting into the field, to go look there to see if there is anything that relates to what they're looking for, whether that be the training courses that they're interested in, or upcoming webinars, or any tool that they want to find an artifact to parse, or a tool to parse an artifact rather. They've got listings of blogs and podcasts and books, and I'm not doing them justice with the amount of work that they put in almost daily, updating and maintaining these repositories. So for new and experienced examiners, they're great resources to spend some time on.
Awesome, thank you very much. And then we have the Discord, and Phil, you wanted to, you brought this in, but I'll just say, I didn't even know this existed until just a few months ago. And so I joined the Discord just recently, and I'm amazed at the number of people that are in here.
Yeah, so it was started by Andrew Rathman, and and basically it was originally just focused on mobile forensics, but it's really grown for the last couple of years, and it covers a whole variety of topics. And I'm sure a lot of us when we started spent a lot of time on forensic focus, where we would like to talk and discuss and learn from others. That's kind of now moved to this Discord channel, which has last count over 3,000 members, and it's growing all the time. And it's a really good place to ask questions and get answers, which is good to see. It's good to see these kind of resources growing, because not everyone it likes one resource over another. Some people don't want to spend their time on Twitter, but will happily sit on a Discord, and so it's a good thing to see.
All right, and then in addition to like the formal and the informal route that people take, we also have the opportunity to go out and experiment ourselves. And again, Phil, you kind of touched on this a little bit when you were talking about your background, about going out and finding information to do practice examinations on and stuff. What are some of the places you go to get this information?
There's on About DFIR and DFIR Training, they've got a listing of test images. There are, over the years, there's just been so many different CTFs that have been put together, and they usually come with associated, mobile data or computer data that people have acquired and put questions together for. And a few of those CTFs are still up and running. Some of them, you can just download the questions and play along. You can sign up to things like NetWars or Hack the Box and actively play around with the different types of investigations or cases, I guess, that they can throw at you, and you can just figure out where your blind spots are, especially in things like NetWars, where you sit there and you go, I can't answer these questions because I know nothing about network forensics or malware analysis. But obviously, for those that are, very new and getting into the field, I always tell people you can really easily make your own test images, make your own test data. And the reason why is because, if you want to get into mobile forensics, you can just take your phone and you can dump the data off it with free tools, parse them with, very, very easily with some of the free tools, or get trials from different vendors, and you can just see what the information is being stored on your phone looks like. And you can see in this picture here, they basically put together a whole bunch of test data that people can use and play around with and learn. And this is iOS 13 test images that are, just really, really cool to see that people are doing this in the community. And this was done by Josh Hickman. So he's put out a whole bunch of iOS images recently, but also Android images that anyone can take, download, and see what the artifacts look like. If you want to do that on a Windows computer or a Mac, if you've got one, very easy to do. You can test it. You can say, I don't know anything about this, and learn about it. So I tell everyone to spend some time doing that, to just learn.
Absolutely. And the good thing about creating your own test images is that you know exactly what happened. And so you know what to look for and where the evidence likely is going to reside. So it's helpful to get that kind of understanding. In addition to the test images, there's also various capture the flag tournaments which are held. Obviously, SANS has its own CTFs called Net Wars, and Net Wars, because of the whole COVID-19 thing, we've had to readjust a little bit, but we are running online Net Wars tournaments now, and you can go to this link here to find out more information about that. And then we also have the NW3 one. Phil, do you want to give us a bit of information about that one?
I do. One second.
Maybe we'll come back to you in just a second. All right. So the other thing which we talked about was different podcasts that you can listen to, and we kind of, podcast is kind of a generic term we've kind of used here for YouTube channels too. So you got the Forensic Lunch, which we already talked about. 13 Cubed is great. Little pieces of little videos just showing you this is a forensic artifact, this is how to get to it, this is how to do this piece of analysis, which is great for especially for starters. We have the Digital Forensics Survival podcast, and also the Detections podcast. And I'm just realizing how little time we have left here. So Phil, do you want to talk about this last piece, and then we'll turn over for questions?
So my audio is back, which is great. Basically, when I was putting some research together about small communities, online communities, and these two statistics kind of showed up. Basically, what happened was this guy, Jacob Nielsen, in 2006 put together this rule surrounding communications and contributions to online repositories, like online communities like the digital forensic community, for example. And he's finding that 1% of people were actually creators in the space. Only 9% were commentators, and the rest of people would just lurk and read and just not really contribute so much as just take the information. That was later expanded, showing that it was probably closer to 10, 20, and 70%. But the lesson that I want to kind of impart on people is that there are 10% of the community that are actively creating, which means it's not actually that hard to stand out because you're only competing with 10 other %. So if you start a blog, if you start talking to people, if you start sharing information as much as you can, you are in the top 10% of people that are doing the same thing. Whenever someone says to me, I want to get into forensics, and I say start a blog, no one takes me up on the offer. I'm happy to help people, but it takes that person to actually take that extra step and demonstrate that they want to do that. And there's not a lot of people that do it. It's hard, but it has paid dividends for a lot of people that I've spoken to. So it's something that I always like to finish off and tell people, you know, get started, get engaged.
Absolutely. I can tell you that when I started to do the Forensic Forecast podcast, I'd only been working in the field for 2 years. I was not experienced really at all. And so I can tell you it changed my career drastically. All right. And finally, we don't have very many significant female names in the forensics field. It's getting better, but we could do with more. And so SANS has this Women in Cybersecurity forum, which they'll be hosting this Friday. Please go ahead and sign up for that if you're interested. Also on LinkedIn, there is a Women in Digital Forensics group, which you can go and join. And we've got plenty of people at SANS, like Catherine and Katie and Sarah, Alyssa, Heather, who aren't the same person, I should point out, who can give really good advice to young females looking to get into the field and what to expect and things like that too. All right, so I know we are past the time allotted for the webcast, and I apologize for going over, but if anyone has questions they wish to ask, we're happy to take them either on here now, or if you'd rather send us messages individually, you can reach us later on social media. But Jessica, do we have any questions?
We do, yeah, but we have run out of time. Any questions not answered, like Lee had mentioned, you can reach out to them on social media, or you can actually send the questions to q@sans.org, and we'll be able to send them over to the presenters today for this webcast. But thank you so much to our speakers, Jason, Phil, Lee, and Catherine, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.